September 12, 1683, outside the walls of Vienna, the largest Ottoman army ever assembled, over 140,000 soldiers, has been besieging the city for over 2 months. The Habsburg defenders are starving, outnumbered, and running out of time. Then, at the last possible moment, a relief force, led by the Polish King Jan III, crashes down the hills in one of history's most dramatic reversals. The Ottomans are routed, Vienna is saved, and the Ottoman Empire begins its long, slow decline. What if the force never came? What if Jan III was delayed by just a week? What if Vienna fell? Today we're going down that road, and trust me, the world that comes out the other side looks nothing like the one we live in today. To understand what's at stake, we need to zoom out. By 1683, the Ottoman Empire was already one of the most powerful states in history. It controlled 3 continents: Southeastern Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Its capital, Constantinople, was one of the most magnificent cities on earth. Vienna wasn't just another city. It was the seat of the Habsburg Empire, the heart of Catholic Europe, and the gateway to the West. Every ruler in Europe understood what Vienna's fall would mean. That's why the Pope himself helped broker the alliance that ultimately saved it. The Grand Vizier, Mustafa Pasha, led the Ottoman siege. He was ambitious, possibly overconfident, and chose to besiege rather than storm Vienna quickly, a decision that gave the relief force enough time to arrive. In our alternative timeline, we're going to say he moves faster. The city falls in late August, so Vienna is now Ottoman. Now what? The first domino to fall is the Habsburg Empire itself. Emperor Leopold I has already fled the city before the siege. With Vienna gone, his legitimacy is shattered. The patchwork of kingdoms and duchies that make up the Holy Roman Empire begins to fracture. Hungarian nobles, who resented Habsburg rule, switched sides almost immediately. And why wouldn't they? The winning side just won. The psychological impact across Europe cannot be overstated. Paris, London, Warsaw, Rome. Every court on the continent receives the news in stunned silence. The idea that Christian Europe is invincible, the assumption that has underpinned Western confidence for centuries, dies in that moment. The Ottomans, flush with victory and plunder, press their advantage. Bratislava falls within weeks. The Ottoman frontier pushes into Bavaria. And now the question every European monarch is asking is, who's next? And more importantly, who do I ally with to survive? Here's where it gets really interesting. France, under Louis XIV, the Sun King, is actually in a complicated position. He had back-channel communications with the Ottomans for decades. France and the Ottomans had been informal allies against their mutual enemy, the Habsburgs. With Vienna fallen, Louis sees his greatest rival humiliated. He doesn't send troops to help. Instead, he moves to pick up the pieces in the west, seizing territories the weakened Habsburgs can no longer defend. England is watching carefully. With no dominant continental power to balance against, English-French policy, which had revolved around preventing any single empire from controlling Europe, suddenly had no clear enemies. The religious dimension complicates everything. Protestant England has little love for the Catholic Habsburgs, but fears an Islamic superpower on the doorstep of the continent. Meanwhile, Russia, under Tsar Fyodor III, who dies in our real timeline in 1682, so let's say his successor takes a more aggressive stance, sees an opportunity. With the Ottoman attention focused west, Russia begins consolidating territory to the north and east of the Black Sea. The great game for Eurasia is beginning. Europe doesn't unite, it splinters. And that changes everything. Here's a triple effect people don't immediately think about: religion. In our timeline, the Catholic Church and the Habsburg Empire were deeply intertwined. The Habsburgs were the great defenders of Catholicism against both the Protestants and the Muslims. Remove the Habsburgs and the Church loses. its most powerful secular shield. Protestants, which had been pushed back significantly during the 30-Year War, now experiences a second wind. Protestant princes in Germany, no longer fearing Habsburg retaliation, assert themselves. In some parts of Central Europe, we might even see Protestant rulers quietly negotiating with the Ottomans. The Ottomans were historically tolerant of Christians paying the jizya tax, choosing survival over crusade. The Vatican faces an existential crisis. Does the Pope call for yet another crusade? Against what? With whom? The great Catholic powers are either defeated, in retreat, or cutting deals. This is potentially the moment the papacy's political influence over European monarchies begins to collapse, a century earlier than it did in our actual history. Now here's the really big picture question. What happens to the Americas? In 1683, Spain and Portugal already had vast colonial empires in the Americas. Spain is the dominant power, but Spain is also a Catholic Habsburg ally, deeply tied to the same network of alliances that just collapsed. A weakened, distracted Spain pulling resources back to defend Europe means less investment, less military presence, and less control over its American colonies. Does this accelerate independence movements in the Americas? I'd say possibly by decades. Does it create space for French, Dutch, or English expansion into Spanish-held territories? I think almost certainly. The map of the Americas in this alternate timeline of the 1700s looks very different, more fragmented, more contested, and potentially more diverse in its colonial powers. And consider the transatlantic slave trade. Much of that trade was structured around Spanish and Portuguese colonial demand. Disruption of those empires' stability and ambition has humanitarian implications, some potentially better, some potentially worse, and this all depends on who fills the vacuum. The Ottoman Empire itself, controlling Eastern Mediterranean, becomes the world's most important trade hub. Silk Road commerce, which had been declining as European sea routes developed, gets a second life. Constantinople becomes even more central to global commerce. So let's fast forward, say 50 to 100 years into this alternative timeline. What does the world look like? The Ottoman Empire is massive, but faces the same internal pressures it did in real history, governing an empire that now stretches from Baghdad to Bavaria. And that's enormously complex and hard to do. Different ethnic and religious groups, communication challenges, and the same military technology gap that eventually doomed the real Ottoman Empire starts to emerge here too. The question is whether having more European territory and talent gives them tools to modernize faster, or whether the overextension accelerates the collapse, and that's an important question. Europe without the Habsburg anchor develops differently. The nation-state, the concept of France, England, Spain, as defined sovereign countries with clear borders, arguably emerges faster, because the old feudal Holy Roman Empire structure is shattered. You might actually see earlier forms of nationalism, earlier constitutional movements as people define themselves in opposition to Ottoman rule. And here's the uncomfortable question the video should sit with. Does the Enlightenment still happen? The Enlightenment was deeply tied to specific social and economic conditions in Western Europe. The printing press, the merchant class, relative political stability, Protestant individualism changed those conditions radically, and the philosophical revolution that gave us democracy, human rights, and modern science might be delayed, might emerge differently, or might emerge somewhere entirely unexpected, perhaps in a thriving Ottoman intellectual culture that absorbed the best minds of Central Europe. History loves to present itself as inevitable. Of course, the West rose. Of course, Europe dominated the globe. Of course, democracy spread. But 1683 is a reminder of how thin the margin was. One battle, one relief force arriving just in time, one Polish king who chose to ride. That's what separates our world from the alternate one we just talked about. If Vienna falls, there is no British Empire as we know it. No American Revolution the way it happened. No Enlightenment on the same timeline. The modern world, for better or worse, looks fundamentally, radically different. And perhaps most sobering of all, it wouldn't necessarily be worse. Different doesn't mean worse. An Ottoman-dominated Europe might have produced its own extraordinary things. The Islamic Golden Age had already given the world algebra, astronomy, and medicine. Who's to say what a larger, longer-lasting Ottoman civilization might have contributed? History isn't a timeline. History isn't a story with one right ending. It's a tree with infinite branches. Today, we walk down one of the most dramatic ones. If you made it this far, you clearly love this stuff as much as I do, so make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell so you never miss a video. Drop in the comments which alternative history do you want us to discuss next, and I read every single one of them. Thank you and good night.